I'm a professor of economics. I've studied it all my life. What you're saying is a nice way, better way than they usually do, for what used to be called trickle-down economics. You help the folks at the top, you boost the profits, you give them a tax cut, and it'll trickle down to a good job for me and all that. I'm going to be more nice now than I ought to be. There was a grain of truth to that, but it isn't anymore. And that's perhaps the most important thing that I can tell you. And I'll say it as bluntly as I know how. The American empire is over. We're done. We peaked about 12, 15 years ago, and we are on a down. And it's very hard for the American people, which I understand. I am one. It's hard to get your head around that. We've had a century of on the way up, which is a lot more fun than on the way down. But it does happen to every empire. We're only the latest. Look at the British, how far they've fallen. We're in that process. So the problem with the trickle down is, yeah, there might be more jobs, but they're going to be created in China. They're going to be created in Brazil. They're going to be created in India. They're not created here.
How do you compare this moment of slashing, particularly in the federal government, to, say, the 90s when Bill Clinton did something somewhat similar?
Right.
Is this just a partisan disagreement, or are there substantive differences?
No. Again, and I know this is difficult for people to hear, this is a cut based on desperation. This is an economy that is indeed, we have the greatest level of corporate debt this country has ever seen, off the chart. The greatest level of personal debt, and we have the greatest level of government debt. Our government debt is now trillions of dollars greater than our annual output. That was not the case in the 20th century. It is the case now. What you're seeing is desperation politics. The whole Trump phenomena ought to say to you, wait a minute, these jerky moves that are out of whack, right? In recent days, we have seen the decision of the Trump administration to kiss the war in Ukraine goodbye. We're not doing that no more because we can't afford it. We can't keep funding a war, which, by the way, the West is losing, as anybody who pays attention knows. All of these things are signs of what? Of a country that is in trouble and is turning on its friends because it can to save itself. We're going to take over, we're going to get your energy for nothing. We're going to, make you build the wall, Hugh, in Mexico. Look what the genius in a way of Mr. Trump is that without understanding it, because clearly he doesn't, he feels in his own way, the way lots of people do, that there's something that necessitates going way beyond what has been done because our need as a society is beginning to show up. Look, let me give you a simple example. The best electric vehicles in the world right now, but by uniform global agreement, are produced by something called the BYD Corporation, which probably most folks have never heard of, which is Chinese. BYD, the initials, BYD. They make the best quality, cheapest electric car and truck. All right. You don't see them anywhere in the United States. Why not? Because Mr. Trump put a 27% tariff on them, and Mr. Biden raised it to 100%. So let me give you an example. Wow. If you wanted to buy a $30,000 BYD electric vehicle, which you could do, that's what they charge. That's why it's so good. You would have to pay $30,000 to get the Chinese to ship it here. Then you'd have to give another $30,000, 100%, tariff to Uncle Sam, or in this case, Uncle Don, in the way of a tariff. So it would cost you $60,000, which you're not going to do because you can get a less good Tesla or GM or Ford or anybody else at $40,000 to $50,000, which is less than you'd have to pay. But here's the problem.
I was going to say, because right now this sounds like a good plan to a lot of people. Trump has said, I'm going to do this not just to China, although he's going to double existing tariffs to China, obviously. Right. But Mexico, Canada, everybody. If we intensify the tariffs, the scenario you just painted will happen, and people will be forced to buy U.S. stuff.
Right.
Which then creates U.S. jobs, which again stimulates the economy.
All right, let me be the economist. Okay? That's good for the Tesla company, which I'm sure is purely coincidental, and GM and Ford and the others. Good. And they'll maybe be able to hold on to some jobs. Good. But now let's follow the bouncing ball, because that's my job as an economist.
Yeah.
Everywhere else in the world, every company in Asia, Africa, Latin America that competes with an American company that has to buy a truck as part of its business will go to China and buy the best truck at the lowest price, $30,000, the best truck. No American company that competes with them will do that. And you know what that means? Those companies will be able to charge a lower price because they have better inputs than the American company, which doesn't. In the long run, that will lose Americans' jobs left and right as they're outcompeted by all the rest of the world that can go and buy, and is buying, BYD trucks. If you go to Europe right now and you go on the auto routes all over Europe, you'll see BYD cars and trucks. America is shooting itself in the foot. It may be great politics for Mr. Trump. I'm helping the auto companies and the workers. He'll go to Michigan and give us... Yeah, but what you're doing is diminishing the capability of the United States to hold on at a time when its footprint in the world is shrinking. If you take the United States together with the other G7 countries, that used to be the dominant bloc of the world, right? The United States, let's just enumerate them so everybody knows. Canada, Japan, Germany, France, Italy, and Britain, okay? The G7, and I'm going to add up all the GDP, gross domestic product, total output of goods and services of all of those 7 countries, U.S. and its major allies. And now I'm going to compare it to the gross added up GDPs of China and its allies, known now as the BRICS. Okay, you add up the United States, about 28% of world output. You add up China and the BRICS, it's 35% of the world output. We aren't the wealthiest bloc in the world. We're number 2. And that's new. And that changes everything. Every country in Asia, Africa, Latin America, trying to figure out who to go to borrow money from, who to go to cut a deal with, who to go to sell your exports, who to go to invest in your railroads. You know where they used to go? Washington, London, Paris, of course. Now they go there.
But they go to India and Brazil.
That's right. They go to Sao Paulo, New Delhi, Beijing, and they ask, can you give us a better deal? And here's the news I got to give you. They get the better deals, and they go that way. And that's not going to stop. And you can rattle your sabers all over the board. You put the 7th Fleet in the South China Sea, isn't going to change that. You've got to come to terms with that, but we are led by people who don't want to do that because nobody wants to be the politician who has to explain to the people it's over. And we now have to figure out, which we should do and we could do, and we have still lots of resources to manage coming to terms with the changed situation.
And a kind of economic insularity doesn't do that. It's saying, hey, we may not do so well in the global market anymore, but if these companies, these U.S. companies, are sort of treated properly and the tariffs keep the other people out, we can, just based on the few hundred million people in this country, be able to support our economy, create jobs, and live steadily.
I doubt it. Possible, but I doubt it.
Why?
Because it's never worked that way. We have a global economy. We're more globalized than we ever were. We have language now. Supply chain. Almost every American kind of understands what's a supply chain. Didn't used to think about things like that because we were all here. When they say supply chain, they kind of know that when you get up in the morning and you have your breakfast, the coffee doesn't come from America and the sugar in it doesn't come from America. So if you put a lot of tariff, your latte is going to cost you $30. Uh-oh. How are you going to manage this in a country already troubled with inequality? The price increases alone, suggested by what he's doing, the dramatic actions, they look dramatic. I'm helping America. It looks wonderful. I mean, it's choreographed in Hollywood, but it doesn't work.
Do you think he has a good faith belief that this will lead to the best outcomes for the American people?
Oh, I think that, given what I gather from what he says, I don't know how to say this politely. He doesn't understand the economics real well. The things he said are things which an undergraduate after maybe 3 weeks wouldn't say.
Wow.
I'll give you an example. Tariffs. He keeps saying, and he said it before, the tariffs, I'm going to get China with these tariffs. Tariffs are paid by Americans to the American government. Tariffs are a tax. They just have it's a tax on imports to which we have given historically a particular name, tariff. But it's a tax. And people ought to wonder, the anti-tax party, the Republicans, are the big gung-ho for a tax. Something has changed. He keeps thinking that he can hit other countries with a tariff. No, you hit us with the tariff. We have to pay it. It means we will have to pay more for everything you attach a tariff to.
And they can retaliate with their own tariff.
Of course.
Which is another piece of this is consumer protections. Trump has deregulated.
Yeah, that's gone. That's gone.
So consumers may pay more, but I'm also hearing you say they also may be less protected from.
They are less protected.
What does that look like?
There's a listeria epidemic going through old age homes here in the United States. Really serious. Killing you. I mean, it's not just hurting people getting sick. It's killing old people in nursing homes. Yeah. Okay, that's why we have regulation. You teach a course in regulation, you understand, if you do it properly, that we've had a whole series of experiences, we in the U.S., and that has been mirrored by capitalist countries across the world, everywhere. If you leave activity to the private sector, what you are doing is making profit the bottom line. That's how they work. So we needed regulation because the end result was we're not all good people. Most of us are, but there are those amongst us who will be tempted, and then we'll have a cookie which kills us, or we'll have a wheel that doesn't work properly on the car. So we need regulation. Guess what? If you dismiss regulation, which has happened before, here's what has happened every time. Sooner or later, we have to put back the regulation. Why? Because of the underlying logic of this system. Why does every company tell us safety is our first concern? Why do they tell us that? Because it isn't.
Okay, right.
That's why they tell us. They have to tell us that because we're all smart enough to understand. We know why they're in business.
Right.
They're in business to make a buck. Because we're in the business, many of us, to make a buck. We understand. And can you be tempted to do something that might not be? Sure you can.
I'd like to turn to foreign policy for a bit. Donald Trump has said that he wants to turn Canada into the 51st state. He wants to take over the Panama Canal, Gaza, and Greenland. He's already renamed the Gulf of Mexico, the Gulf of America. You argued that this is a kind of 18th century crude colonialism.
Right.
Why, at a moment like this, where the United States, from your perspective, has a weakened global position, would they take on such ambitious, ostensibly colonial activity as opposed to hunkering down domestically?
Well, if you study colonialism, you discover that most of the time, when a country began going overseas and snatching parts of the world, it was because of two things. One, it needed to, and two, it could. The United States needs it, and the United States can. It can't take over Europe. It's too expensive, too difficult. They're too rich, and they're too powerful. And they can't control Russia. They're learning that now.
Oh, yeah.
Badly. And they can't control China. They've learned that now for 25 years. But what can they control? They can control Mexico. They can control Canada. Or at least they can make a stab at it. $1 out of $5 worth of food that you and I and everybody eats comes from overseas, and most of that from Mexico and Canada. Energy comes. A huge portion of our energy is Canadian, oil, gas, and so on. So these are basic things we need, and we're strong enough. They depend on us way more than we depend on them. We're a much bigger economy than either of them. So we can.
So just might makes right?
Basically. And he's also aware, he's a good politician, he's aware that a lot of the things he's going to do are going to produce real tensions inside the United States between those parts of the community that are hurt and those that are not. Foreign adventures have always had that wonderful quality that we can unite our country in opposition to, in feeling superior to, in benefiting from, really, or by imagination, those other over there.
Let's talk about those others over there some more, because throughout this conversation, you've been talking about the BRICS nations.
Yeah.
How significant, as a military matter, is the BRICS economic alliance, is the emerging power of China? How scared should we be?
It's fundamentally very different. Let me explain. Economically, the game is over. The Chinese, if not already a wealthier economic unit than we are, which they probably are, will be within a few years. Very few, like by the end of this decade, if not already. So economically, they are now our equal. But remember, they're our equal. They're going up. We're going down. We're equal, but the trajectory is unmistakable across the board. All right? And so politically, it comes right after that. If you're that powerful economically, if you're the place that the whole world goes to cut a deal because you get a better deal than you can get from Washington or London, which is now most of the time the case. That's why if you look at the biggest harbor being built in Africa, it's being built by the Chinese. If you look at the new railroads going across parts of Latin America, it's built by the Chinese, you know, on and on and on. You know, the Panama Canal, why does he want to take it? Well, the United States is the number one country using the Panama Canal. China's number two. China has built all these buildings to handle their shipping. You know, it's everywhere, and once you start looking, you see it everywhere. But militarily, there's none of that. Americans have to understand, even if you don't agree with me, try to understand how the rest of the world looks at it. The United States maintains 750 military bases around the world. China doesn't have any. The United States is a global military presence, the likes of which is not existing anywhere. We are alone in that.
How long is that solitude going to last if, as you're saying, the economic power is diminishing of the United States? That then transforms into diminished political power because, again, the sway is held by the other nations.
Look at the votes in the UN. You'll see the diminished political power right on display.
So then it feels like the military's next.
Right.
How scared should we be?
Well, I put it this way. I think you're at a crossroads now. Either you decide to stay with what you're doing, in which case you're right. They will. Even if they, in their minds, think it's defensive, who cares? They will develop a military capability because that will be their only safety for them. Forget whether you agree with them or not. It's not the issue. But there's an alternative. The alternative is you sit down and you say to your adversary, we both got to live on this planet. Can we work out a deal where we give each other the room to function, to live? Because if we threaten each other, what's the end game of this? We spend a fortune fighting. If we ever slip and make a nuclear war, it's over anyway. So that's a dead end. Why don't we try that? It's a better shot.
Right now, we're still in a moment of shock and disbelief as a global community about the last White House meeting between Trump, his Vice President J.D. Vance, and Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky at the Oval Office last week. What was supposed to be, I thought, a fairly ordinary discussion about a deal regarding Ukraine's mineral wealth and military assistance turned into an international spectacle. You had Trump and Vance literally chastising President Zelensky for a perceived lack of gratitude for U.S. assistance. At some point, it went from a meeting to a shouting match in many respects. And Zelensky was eventually asked to leave the White House, which is something I personally have never seen before in my short time on this planet. Some people say this is a historical turning point again. How does a moment like that speak to where we are as a nation, and also the possibilities of the U.S. being a steward of global leadership moving forward?
Yeah, well, the United States is at that point which every empire has had when it's over, when the empire is in decline. It's happened to every other empire. I know we might want to believe that we are the exception, we are the empire that will last forever, but the burden is on the person who believes that, given the historical record. So for me,
is this about a declining empire, or is this just about bad leadership?
No. This is about a declining. It may also be about. It's not either or. But the important thing is not the lousy leader, which we have. The importance is that on the issue of what we just talked about, coming to terms with China, sitting down, how do we live together on this planet? Unfortunately, Mr. Trump is exactly where Mr. Biden was. There is no difference between them. The pivot to China, which, by the way, was initiated in those words by Mr. Obama as president, has been followed by everybody since. In fact, one of the arguments made by the new defense head, is that we have to free up our resources to confront our real problem. You're going to see that coming from the Trump administration now more and more as they disengage from Ukraine, a lost cause.
But that's not a situation that would be replicated by Biden or Obama, would you say? I mean,
no, Biden wanted to fight the Russians.
Right.
Trump says, wrong enemy, and you're losing. We don't want to do that. We don't want to send American troops over there because that wouldn't fly at home. So that's a dead end. We can't do that.
Is Trump right?
Absolutely. What's he going to do? Everything the United States has been thrown into that war. Remember at the beginning of the Ukraine war, we weren't going to give them Abrams tanks. We weren't going to give them F-16s. We weren't going to give them HIMARS. We weren't going to give them long-range missiles. Everything that we said, President Biden said, was unturned. We gave them because they were losing. They needed more and more. He wants still more. He wants nuclear. There's no end for. He's losing his country. About a quarter of it are gone already. The Russians occupy it, and they keep moving westward. It's a losing proposition. It's as if the whole 20th century, when I was growing up, I'm a creature of the 20th century, at least the second half of it, everything was told to us in terms of the Cold War. Capitalism, democracy, over here, communism, socialism, over there. That was the great struggle. What happened? All gone? What? Now we're talking Russia, China, we're talking countries, which we used to do before the struggle became socialism and communism. So for me, I think all Mr. Trump is doing is saying, okay, we are now in a world of big powers, Russia, China, U.S., Europe, but the Europeans are disunified. They're not doing anything. They're not inventing anything. They're fading out of the story. It's really sad for the Europeans. But we're here, and the Chinese are the big one coming up. I mean, let's remember, America's population, keep perspective, America's population is 4.5% of this world. China and the BRICS together is 50-60% of the world. It's not close.
You say that Trump is doing what whoever had become president would have had to do sooner or later. This may be the most generous quote toward Donald Trump that you've ever given. Why?
I'm going to assume that Mr. Biden was a rational leader and that Kamala Harris likewise. I'm assuming that. They would have seen that there are three ways things can go in Ukraine. Number one, we can have a nuclear fight with the Russians. I want to remind everyone, because Americans don't like to face this, most of the world believes, and that's all I can say, therefore I believe it too, that the largest nuclear Armageddon force in the world is the Russians. Bigger than the Chinese and bigger than ours. Number two, a conventional war That would mean hundreds of thousands of American troops would have to be shipped over there and fight against the Russians. You know, the record historically is not real good. Napoleon invaded Russia, was real sorry. Hitler invaded Russia, was real sorry. Do we really? Mr. Biden always said, no troops on the ground, no boots on the ground. He seemed, and I'm going to give him credit, that's a recipe for a disaster that we will not be able to control. Okay, but there is no third option other than to walk away. Mr. Trump said, I agree with you, I'm walking away. Mr. Trump did it. Mr. Biden couldn't because he was so deeply in. Look, it took us, most people understand, it took us several years to withdraw from Afghanistan. But we lost in Afghanistan. I know this is hard for Americans. We went to war in Afghanistan against the Taliban. You know who runs the country now? The Taliban.
And it didn't take long.
No, we lost. We went into Vietnam to fight against the North Vietnamese. The country was divided at that time, which was run by the North Vietnamese Communist Party. You know who runs Vietnam now? The Communist Party. We lost. All right, we went into Iraq. We were supposed to do something there, hard knows what, but we lost there. We're gone there too. And we're in the process of losing Ukraine. If you're an empire and you lose against some of the poorest countries on earth, you know what it suggests? Something's wrong. Look, when you came out of World War II in 1945, the United States was absolutely dominant. Most of the second half of the 20th century, where people, watching this program, we all had at least some memory about it. We were the richest country, the most politically powerful. We had all those bases around the world. We had the biggest military. Wow. Yes, it go to your head. It does. We were king of the hill. But those things are always temporary. They always have been. When we go to Egypt, we look at the ruins of their empire. When we go to France, we look at the chateaus that are the memory of what they once were. Well, it's not going to happen to us. We're somehow different. It's already happened. We haven't been paying attention because it's so painful to look at. I think I'm the patriot saying to America, to save the good things about the society, let's sit down and work with... Look, China says, I'm not asking anyone to believe it. I'm not sure I believe it. But China says they're in favor of a multinational world. They're not interested in being the next empire. Maybe because they once were an empire some centuries ago, they may understand better than most that it's a short run. It's a heady run, but it's a short run. And maybe they will be willing to sit down. And then the United States has a really good deal because right after China, it's us. We still are rich and powerful as a nation.
Just moving in the wrong direction.
That's right. So maybe the best move is to sit down with the up-and-comers and work something out.
We'll see. Richard Wolff, thank you so much for joining me on Up Front.
My pleasure, and thanks for having a program like this where these things can be talked about.
You bet.